Thank you, Madam Chairman. Certainly want to acknowledge my colleague ministers and also honorable members of Parliament, members of the Senate, ladies and gentlemen, and of course to the civil servants. I've got a little more latitude than my colleagues because in terms of talking about the pre-budget process, I'm going to, I suppose, provide the framework, and the ministers will certainly supplement it. Ms. Alberta Dyer-Tucker has certainly set out the broad brush principles. You know about the pre-budget report. You may remember that last year, post the budget, we had a number of taking it to the people, certainly budget sessions. They were public meetings. I also signaled in the national budget statement for 2010 and 2011-12 that we would be having the open budget framework and we would be unveiling it. Well, promise made, promise delivered. What we're really going to be looking at here and over the next couple of weeks, and even as part of the pre-budget formulation and framework, is really from your perspective, the people's perspective, following the money. What do I mean by that? Every year in February, we have the national budget process where we appropriate monies. Those monies, once appropriated, are then dispersed to the relevant ministries in terms of their expenditure over that year. Part of the challenge, especially in these times, is allocating and deciding where can we get best value for money and where should we focus in terms of our policies and programs. So over the course of both tonight and over the next couple of weeks, you'll hear a lot about the budgetary process. And I think that certainly what is important is the feedback loop. Already you've heard some comments from some quarters. Others may have different views where we've put out some trial balloons, really to get a sense of what the people's views are on certain fiscal policies that could be under consideration. So I think the important thing is to recognize the importance, as the President Obama has said, this is the era of engagement. That means crucial conversations, that means feedback. So this meeting is really about soliciting and hearing your views as to how you think your taxpayer dollars should be spent. And you're probably wondering or want reminding about how the budget is allocated now. The 2011-12 budget current account expenditure was $1,002,451,000. How is that split up between the ministries? How is it allocated? Non-ministry departments, for instance, when you talk about the judiciary and things like the ombudsman, those areas which are not subject to any direct ministerial influence, got $14.6 million. Cabinet office and departments got $18.1 million. Justice, the Attorney General flanks me, it got $4.2 million. Finance got $202 million. And remember, finance is responsible for dealing with a number of the overhead expenses, pensions, and things of that like. Education got $128 million, and I'm rounding them out. Health got $172 million. Environment, planning, and infrastructure strategy got $14.2 million. Transport got $76.2 million. Public Works got $55.9 million. Youth, families, and sports, and that's Minister Blakeney, who you'll hear about some of the particular issues in his remit, because he's very much, as I suppose, as an agent of change and dealing with on the front line of social policy issues, that got $62.3 million. National security, and I certainly acknowledge my colleague, Minister Parent-Chief, got $100.8 million. Government estates and information services, that's Minister Scott, got $33.1 million. Now remember, that used to be the mammoth monolith Ministry of Public Works. We've split out Public Works, so you have Public Works and then you have Government estates and information services. Economy, trade, and industry got $23.6 million, and business development and tourism got $40.3 million. Community development, remember we recently collapsed that ministry into economy, trade, and industry with the resignation of Minister Robin, but that had $6.2 million. Now, what do we mean by open budgeting? Well, what open budgeting is, it's an effective and strategic budget tool. It certainly helps, as I said, to encourage public engagement and participation in the country's spending decision. And it also gives you the opportunity to ask whether you think the money spent on program X on Y or Y, should it be changed? Ministers have zero-based budgeting as a stratagem in their ministry, so they've got to prioritize. Let's say they have 20 items, they've got to prioritize. Those that come above the line are the ones that will be funded. Those that fall below the line are those that will not be funded. So it requires the minister to have astuteness, sensitivity to the times we're living in, and also to be able to promote living within your means and affordability. Now, so it's where you come in is how do you feel about where your dollars are being allocated. For example, today, Minister Miners was on the Sherry J show, and a caller called in and stated we need to introduce unemployment insurance as a matter of urgency. Excellent concept. You may recall the first Minister of Finance under this government, my father, the late C. Eugene Cox, had certainly intended and hoped to introduce. But part of engagement means consultation. Consulted not just with the unions, but also with the employers. People thought, oh, it's a great idea, but, well, what's the but? What's the sticking point? I'm going to talk briefly about it, because who provides the money for that? It doesn't fall like manna from heaven. Can the employer afford to pay a higher tax to fund the scheme? And are employees prepared to pay an additional payroll tax to subsidize the fund? And if not, how will the government raise the additional revenue to fund the scheme? And those are the types of questions that we grapple with in considering whether this is an idea that we should implement. And certainly there is no easy answer, and the financial impact is huge. The open budget process further empowers you by giving you more information about how the government's spending decisions are made and how your taxes are being used. Now, to get greater participation, we certainly intend to run blogs and sites. Today, in fact, the minister who has responsibility for corrections, she may not have gotten an email that was sent to by myself and to the Commissioner of Corrections, and it was also copied 2 letters to the editor. And it was from somebody who set out a list of recommendations as to how monies could be saved, including that prisoners, inmates, should be having to pay for their sneakers and their attire. They set out a number of other issues also and said, well, if the training budget is being reduced, why do we still have X amount of training officers? Shouldn't they be either deployed somewhere else or made redundant? The Commissioner gave a very comprehensive response, and I think touched the points relevantly and sensitively, and also advised that many of the ideas that are being promoted are certainly under review or in some cases being actioned sooner rather than later. And that's important.